first principle we want to share with you is to live your life to the fullest, you have to overcome the barriers between your ears. Your biggest barriers to success may be square between your ears. I'm going to tell you a story about James, a former student of mine and a prisoner at a detention center where I taught some 35 years ago. James was an exceptionally bright student, but he had one trait that made him stand out among everyone else in the penal system. He was remarkably good at breaking out of prison. A student would come to class and say, "Where's James?" And someone else would say, "Well, James, he's out." And that gave a whole new meaning to cutting class. So one day, while we're in class, I asked James, I said, "James, tell me what it's like to be a prisoner. I'd really like to get a sense of that. I'd like to get a feel for what it's like to be in prison." He said, "What do you mean? What do you mean you want to know what it's like to be in prison? You are in prison. The only difference between you and me is I know where my walls are. You are in prison." And in fact, that's what we mean by overcome the barriers between your ears. Break out of prison. Leave behind all those barriers. This lesson that I learned from James was reinforced again by other students during the interim years. I've had two remarkable students that I was just privileged to teach. They both had severe disabilities. One was a quadriplegic, and he used like a chopstick with a had in his mouth to peck away at a computer to take notes, and he excelled in my classes. The other was completely blind, another remarkable student. And you see, I may have taught them something, but I learned so much more from them. One thing I learned is how many disabilities I had, how many things I couldn't do that they could do. They had to overcome the barriers between their ears. They had to do this to thrive. And I, on the other hand, could avoid all these issues. And that was a big lesson to learn. Shortly after I learned this lesson, I was with my family at the circus. And we were there watching the high trapeze, you know, where the performers swing from one side to the other, and they leap from these stands into the trapeze and grab the trapeze in the middle of the air and do somersaults. And towards the end of the show, they said, "We need a volunteer." And I thought about James, and I thought about overcoming the barriers between my ears and having the courage to go for it. And I said, "I'll do it." And so I worked my way up the steps. It seemed like I went up 100 feet, but I suspect maybe 30 feet. And I ran into this performer, and I said, "Okay, what do I do?" And she said, "Well, you just dive." But she said, "Before you can dive and grab the trapeze, well, you got to take your glasses off." Take my glasses off? Why, I'm 2800. I can't see a thing with my glasses off. She said, no problem whatsoever. I'll tell you when to dive." And she did. And I dove. And you know what? I got the trapeze. I grabbed it. And that was a sense of exhilaration. Many times over the years, I've grabbed the trapeze. And that's been great. But there's been many other times where I didn't. But if you want to live your life to the fullest, if you want to get the most out of it, then you've got to be willing to go for it. Undoubtedly, external barriers can impede your progress. They're very real. Barriers over which you have limited control. Your race, your gender, your genes. You can't overcome what your parents didn't give you. And for all of those who are like me that are short, bald, and skinny, the length of your hair. But you have considerable control over your environment. And your failure to exercise this control, formulate a vision. What is it you're here for? What are you living for? And summon the courage to seize opportunities. Well, all of these may be the biggest barriers to your success. Again, if you're going to live your life to the fullest, and you and we've got to dive and break out of prison. If we do that, we'll overcome the barriers between our ears.